पृथिवी शान्तिरन्तरिक्षगं शान्तिर्द्यौ शान्तिर्दिशः शान्तिरवान्तर दिशा शान्तिरग्निः शान्तिर्वायुः शान्तिरादित्यः शान्तिश्चन्द्रमा शान्तिर्नक्षत्राणि शान्तिरापः शान्तिरोषधयः शान्तिर्वनस्पतयः शान्तिर्गौ शान्तिरजा शान्तिरश्वः शान्तिः पुरुषः शान्तिर्ब्रह्म शान्तिर्ब्राह्मणः शान्तिः शान्तिरेव शान्तिः शान्तिर्मे astu shantihi. May there be peace on earth and in the sky. May there be peace in the water and in all directions. May there be peace in the plants, in the trees, and in animals. May there be peace in the hearts of all beings. May there be peace in everyone and in everything. Sarvetra sukhinas santu. Sarve santu niramayaha. Sarve bhadrani pashyantu. Ma kaschid dukkha bhag bhavet. Sarvastaratu durgani. Sarvo bhadrani pashyatu. Sarvas sadbuddhimapnotu. Sarvas sarvatra nandatu. May all be happy and healthy. May all see what is good, and may no one experience misery. May all overcome their obstacles and acquire good tendencies. May people everywhere find joy and fulfillment. Let us now spend some time touching the center of peace and joy in our hearts. A good way to begin the practice is to withdraw the scattered energies of the mind and bring them to rest on one point. That point can be our own breathing. Let us therefore practice breathing with awareness. As we breathe in, let us visualize that our body and mind are being filled with love, strength, and compassion. And as we breathe out, let us release all the stress, anxiety, and exhaustion in the body and mind. Let us practice this way for a while. Let us now turn our attention to the region of our heart. Although God is present everywhere and in everyone, the divine presence can be felt most clearly in our own hearts. We can meditate in any way we have been taught. To remain focused, we can take the help of a short mental prayer or a mantra or a divine name. Let us now spend some time dwelling on the presence of God in our hearts. Om Shanti 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 Harihi Om.
We will sing the song of the Sannyasin, which is the next to the last song in the book. Wake up the dawn, Sannyasin.
Om Asatoma Satkamaya Tamasoma Jyotirgamaya Mrityorma Amritam Gamaya Aviravirmayeti Rudrayatte Dakshinam Mukham Tenamam Pahi Nityam. May the Divine lead us from the unreal to the real, from darkness to light, from death to immortality. May the Divine Consciousness fill our hearts and protect us. Welcome everyone for this Freedom Festival. As we know, we celebrate it every year on the 4th of July. This year we are doing it on the nearest Sunday. This year is also special in a sense that Swami Vivekananda arrived in Boston in 1893. So we complete 125 years. And in many parts, they are observing this 125 years of completion. Not that 125 has any special significance in itself, but it gives us an opportunity to remember some of the events that have significantly shaped our lives. Because but for Swami Vivekananda's arrival here, if that had not occurred, there would be no Vedanta society. None of us would be here. So the fact that somehow circumstances have brought all of us together into one community, and that occurred because Swami Vivekananda came here. And therefore, it's something that is worth remembering and worth celebrating. 4th of July, as many of you know also, is connected with Swami Vivekananda's life because that was the day he chose to give up his body. We don't celebrate death anniversaries in our tradition, partly because we don't believe that Swami Vivekananda is dead. That's why we say he gave up the body. He chose the day when he wanted to give up, and it was the day of American independence. The difference between an enlightened being and an unenlightened being is an enlightened being chooses when to give up the body. And in the case of unenlightened, it's the body that chooses when to give up us. So one of the two will have to give it up. And we hope that we, in our lifetime, through the kind of life we lead and based on our own values, principles toward a spiritual ideal, that we will give up the body before the body gives us up. And giving up the body doesn't necessarily mean death. Giving up the body really means recognizing that I am more than the body, that the body is only a cover. Just like the clothes I wear, I'm not my clothes. I'm a person distinct from my clothes. So this giving up the body is not to die. It doesn't necessarily mean death. It doesn't necessarily also mean not acknowledging the presence of the body. It simply means recognizing that the reality of my existence is more than just the reality of the body. The body is perishable, but I am not perishable. And that's the message that came to us, has come down to us through all the great different spiritual traditions in different ways. And Swami Vivekananda was among the times in which we live, was among the latest among these great enlightened ones to come to remind us of the deeper realities behind our own existence and the deeper reality behind the world in which we live. And so what I thought today, very briefly, to recount the events and the circumstances by which Swamiji arrived in Boston. It's a very fascinating story. Most of you have read his life, and so you are aware of some of the basic the dates and so on. So what I will do today is a very bare outline of how Swamiji finally reached Boston, and as I was preparing for this, it just suddenly struck me there is so many fascinating details about every part of this journey that Swamiji took until he reached Boston, that that it will require much more time than we have today. So my hope is that in the coming weeks and months, we probably will find opportunities to discuss this more in detail. But today, just a bare outline. So we know, of course, Swami Vivekananda became Vivekananda after he came in touch with Sri Ramakrishna, his teacher, and the, the, the central source of inspiration and the guiding light behind our tradition. It was after Ramakrishna's passing in 1886 that this band of young spiritual seekers who had bonded together and formed the first monastery, that many of them then started wandering all through the different paths. That's one of the traditional ways monks have done, Vedanta monks. They don't, some of them stay in one place, but some of them just wander. The wandering has an advantage because it gives us, and they went from place to place without carrying any possessions. The idea was to depend exclusively on God, not even knowing when the next meal would come from or where they would sleep for the night. So that was a part of their training. So Swami Vivekananda, after Ramakrishna's passing, wandered for almost 6 years from north to south, and has that's a very interesting subject in itself, how he met and mingled with the poor, the lowly, the unknown, and also with some of the kings and the wealthy of the period. He was such a charismatic figure that no matter which place he went to, all that we read in his life really, immediately after that, he really didn't want to wander everywhere. He just went to the Himalayas and just said, he wrote in his diary, now to find a quiet cave, silent place, and to lay myself to die. He had already been enlightened before that. There was no reason for him to do anything. And then he writes that he got a telegram. I think many of the new generation won't even know, the millennials won't even know what a telegram is. But there was one mode of communication in olden days. So he got a telegram from Calcutta that his older sister had committed suicide. There was the domestic life wasn't good, and anyway, but we don't know the details. But there was she committed, and he said as soon as that news reached her, he said he just kind of shook him out of his desire to just lay there quietly, and he just said he just felt like wandering. And one of the dominant thoughts in his mind at that time was that the condition of women. It's improved a little bit, but still we know all over the world a lot needs to be done with about gender inequality, the condition of the poor, and so on. The problem hasn't. The problem still remains, and so it was that made Vivekananda give up his perch in a cave in the Himalayas and just go forth. And that's when he met a large number of people. But even when he wandered forth, he had this great desire to remain unknown, which is difficult for a charismatic person to remain unknown. So no matter, he would just go somewhere, and then people would notice him, they would kind of gather around him, and then when he found that it was getting too much, he was becoming too known, then he would just leave the city without telling anyone and go forth to some other place. In order to avoid people following him, he kept on changing his name. So he had some, if you see his olden letters, on occasion, Vivekananda was one of the names he took while wandering. The other name was Swami Vividishananda. There was one Swami Satchidananda. He took different names to avoid being followed. In any case, while wandering, when he came to the south, by the time he came to Chennai in Madras, the news had reached in the papers that there was this big conference, the Parliament of Religions, which was being organized in Chicago. And the group of young men who had become his students and were eager, they said, Swamiji, you must go to Chicago and represent Hinduism. And he was very ambivalent about it because he didn't want to take any initiative. And we read that these young men in Madras, they went from door to door. He was penniless, collecting subscription to buy his ticket to come to America. And anyway, that's a long story. I don't want to go into too many details about it. Finally, when his ticket had to be booked, uh, well, you need a name for the passenger. And so the Raja of Khetri, who was a student of Swamiji, then had his secretary sent to him to Bombay and said, please take the book. He booked the ticket in the name of Vivekananda. So that's how the name struck him. It was not really the name that this thing. So that once, and then even then it could have been changed, but after coming here, it became really too famous. So then you can't change your name after that. So that's how this ticket was booked. But even before that, he sent a message to Calcutta where Holy Mother Sharda Devi was. And he wanted her blessings. He said, without mother's blessings, I won't go anywhere. If she feels this is the right thing to do, then I would go. And then he asked her to keep this completely confidential. So even his brother disciples had no idea where he was. And when Holy Mother sent her blessings, that's when Vivekananda then started. So I've got this map of the world. So he started in Mumbai, which is on the western coast. In those days, there were no aeroplanes, so he had to take the ship. The first halt was in Colombo, in Sri Lanka. From there, he goes to Malaysia and then Singapore. And each of these places, there's some very interesting incidents occurred. Again, no time for that. Read it in his life or wait until sometime in future when we discuss it more. From there, the ship took him to Hong Kong. From Hong Kong to Japan. He went to Kyoto and several places there. Again, he had some very interesting observations to make. And then from there, the ship brought him to Vancouver in Canada. And so that's where the boat left him. And so there is a place in Vancouver. I had gone there a few years ago. And then the railroad station. From there, he took the train to go to Chicago. And so the railroad station is pretty much the same. So if you have been to Vancouver, would like to go, can visit that place. From there, Swamiji took the train first to Winnipeg. And then the train took him to Chicago. Now, the youngsters who had collected all this money to send Swamiji here, they were quite naive in some ways. They thought, he's such a brilliant Swami. All that he has to do is just show up and then represent Hinduism. Of course, by the time Swamiji reached Chicago, he discovered he had no credentials. He hadn't brought any letters of introduction. And even if he had credentials, the date for registration was already over. And you can imagine, India in those days, they had no idea about these things, that you need to be registered, you had to, nothing. So Swamiji goes there and then finds there's no chance. Having taken all this trouble, he can't even participate in the parliament. Worse, the parliament was he reached there toward the end of June. He started in, I think, 31st of May, 1893. It took about 3 weeks, a little more than 3 weeks for him to reach. And then the parliament was more than two months later. So he didn't have much. So he thought, let me at least just watch the parliament from proceeding if it's possible and then return home. But then he discovered that he didn't even have enough money. And Chicago in those days was much more expensive. So people suggested, you can go to Boston to save some money. I think today that's no longer true, probably. So the reason he came to Boston was he thought anyway he has to spend a couple of months. So if he comes to Boston, he can save some money. Now, it had so happened that while he was on a train from Vancouver to Winnipeg and then Chicago, on the train, he had made acquaintance with one of the fellow passengers whose name, this is by the way, yes. So he went and wandered into just saw the fairgrounds in Chicago. So this one, it was not, the Parliament of Religions was not the only thing. That was almost like a sideshow. It is primarily the World's Fair and meant to showcase the technological advances of those days. And so you can see all these, the electric lights, electricity, and all thing was being shown. Like that's the latest that they had to show. Um, the Some of you may be aware why is Chicago called a windy city. You know why it's called a windy city? It had nothing to do with the winds there. And I came to know about some years ago when I Chicago, and I was taking the architectural tour there, and that time they explained why it's called Windy City. The reason for that is just like nowadays, if some city has to host Olympics, people have to like bid for it because there is a lot of advantage you have. So to host the World's Fair, several cities had proposed, and then the two cities who were were shortlisted was New York and Chicago. And then they were going to have a meeting then to decide which of these two cities will host the World's Fair in 1893. And for that meeting to lobby for Chicago, they had sent some of their very veteran politicians who could speak for hours and hours and hours without stop. And finally they won. So because of their long-winded this thing, that's how the name Windy City came. So that Windy City name is connected with the Parliament of Religion. That's how they finally won their bid for holding. And so the World's Fair, and at that time, a few of the enlightened people in Chicago, they thought, well, this is fine, we have this technology and all of that, but this would be a good opportunity to invite some of the religious leaders. And then they called that event the Parliament of Religions, what today we might call a kind of an interfaith gathering. But this was supposed to be on a massive scale. They invited not only the religious leaders in North America, but they invited leaders from all over the world. So this was the first time in 1893 that we had in North America indigenous teachers, not only from Hinduism, but from Zoroastrianism, Shintoism, Buddhism, and so on. D.T. Suzuki is the name many of you may have heard. His teacher was the first indigenous Zen master to come here, and on 1893. So he also spoke at the Parliament of Religions. And so Swamiji wandered through these grounds and saw the things that were occurring, but the Parliament was in September, 2 more months to be passed. And so he then decided to come to Boston because that's what he was advised to do. Now it had so happened that, okay, so let's see this. Here's another one. So Chicago, train to Boston. You can see, of course. I think Boston deserves it because we are the best city and the most important city in the world. So we had to have some special effects for Boston. Now it had so happened that while Swamiji was on the train from Vancouver to Chicago, on the train, he had met this Kate Sanborn. She was a Massachusetts woman, and she was an activist, she was an author, and so she saw, and Swamiji automatically attracted attention in those days, not only because of his charismatic personality, but because also of his dress. He had this, the turban, and it was an unusual robes, and so immediately people noticed it, and so she saw him, and then she said, if ever you have a plan to visit the East Coast, you're welcome to Boston, and I'll be very happy to host you. And so, of course, Swamiji had no plan that time. All that he wanted to go to was Chicago. But then, as it turned out, when they said you go to Boston to save money, and then Swamiji then took the train to Boston. So he came to Boston and stayed in a hotel called Quincy House. That hotel no longer exists. It's actually, that's become the site what's presently the government center and the City Hall Plaza. That's where the original hotel was. So Swamiji stayed there, and then after reaching, he sent wired a telegram or a letter to Kate Sanborn saying, I've arrived here and I'm taking up on your invitation. And so out of the blue, she gets this, and she remembered, oh yeah, that's the gentleman I met on the train. And so then she welcomes him. She gives him the address, and he goes. So she lived in a place, it was a farm, an abandoned farm, what she actually wrote a book later on about her experiences there in Metcalf, It's somewhere near Framingham area, that side area. And this place no longer exists. I think sometime in the early decades of last century, there was a big fire, and most of it was burned down. So this is the house where she stayed, and this is the picture of hers. This is much later. When Swamiji met her, she was young. It's interesting. Swamiji writes in one of her letters, he said, "I met an old lady, and she has invited me to go to Boston." And in a letter he wrote to India, he says that she wants to showcase a curio from India to her friends. And so that's the advantage she has. And the advantage I have is I save some money from and but what I mentioned this because when Swamiji saw her, she was only 54 years old. So wasn't old by any standards. But then Swamiji himself was only 30. And so we know old is a very kind of a relative term. And so in her eyes, she seemed to be an old woman. But this was, of course, much later than that. So Swamiji goes to her place, and he stays there for 3 or 4 days. This was sometime in the mid-August, 1893. Now, her cousin was, I think his name was, if I remember correctly, I think Frank Sanborn. I'm not very sure about his cousins, her cousin, or Henry. It doesn't matter. So he was a transcendentalist. He was a friend of Emerson, Thoreau, and he moved into those circles. And he wasn't very sure about who is this, my cousin, this guest that my cousin has brought. So he came to meet Swamiji. And then he mentioned about Swamiji to some of his friends. And then one professor at Harvard, Professor Wright, he was very interested in meeting Swamiji. And that time, this was summer, so he had rented a place in North Shore, a place called Annisquam. That's where he had rented a place. And so he wanted to come and meet Swamiji at Breezy Meadows, where Kate Sanborn lived. And apparently it just so happened that he wasn't able to make it. Because he wasn't able to make it, but he was eager to meet Swamiji, he invited Swamiji over to Annisquam and made arrangements for his stay in what was then called Miss Lane's boarding house. Let's see if I have a picture. So this is Professor Wright, and this is wife. Mary Wright, wife, she has written some very interesting experiences in her diary about meeting with Swami Vivekananda. Again, no time to go into details, we'll do it later on. So this was the professor who invited then Swamiji over to Annisquam. And this was what they called the lodge. I think just some place he had rented for summer. And this was Mrs. Lane's boarding house. So there were a few students staying there, and they had some place. So the professor arranged for Swamiji's stay in this. And I think the lodge was either the next house or somewhere nearby, just walking distance. Now, if you want to see look at this building. This is a pretty old picture of how it was, and this is how it looks now. So this is the current picture of that place. Some of you may have probably seen it. It's on 8 Arlington Street in Annisquam. If you happen to go that side, feel free to go. It's a private residence, so don't just barge in. But people there are aware of the significance of that place. And so if you just go gently, they don't mind people visiting, but just respect their privacy as well. So actually later on, there is a book called Reminiscences of Swami Vivekananda. And you can see the reminiscence written by one of the students who was there that time. So there were most of the young women there. And so these girls are saying, oh, we had heard some yogi from India is going to come, and how eagerly they were looking for him and so on. So it was here then, and that professor met with Swamiji. And Swamiji would walk over to his place, and they would have long discussions. It is at that time that professor came to know that he had come all the way from India for that Parliament of Religions, discovered he couldn't take part. And the professor was so impressed, he said, I will write a letter of introduction for you. And in those days, as of now, a letter of introduction on a stationery of Harvard University did carry some weight. And so he wrote a glowing letter of introduction. In fact, if you see the original text, he writes in that letter of introduction that to ask, he said, this Swami who has come is more learned than all of our professors put together. And he says to ask him for credentials is like asking the sun its right to shine. It's very, very poetic. So it's that letter that Swamiji received from the professor that finally made it possible for him to go to Chicago. And in fact, Swamiji didn't even have enough money to go back to Chicago. So it's this professor then who bought his ticket, the train ticket back to Chicago, and arranged for it. And so Boston, we can rightly be proud of living in this area, because just as it facilitated Swamiji's entry into the world stage, so to speak, because until the time he spoke at the Parliament of Religions and became a celebrity almost overnight, that not many people even knew about him. So we can be very proud of the fact that we facilitated his entry onto the world stage, just as we facilitated the War of Independence. So Boston is very good at facilitating things. So this is another view of that Lane's boarding house. This is a church in Annisquam. It's called the Annisquam Village Church. So Swamiji was invited to speak. It's a Universalist church, and he was invited to give a sermon there. So the first talk that Swamiji gave in North America was not at the Parliament of Religions, was in fact here on North Shore in this church. So this is again the older picture, and this is the more current picture. Pretty much from what I hear, I have spoken to the people there, and they say not many changes have occurred. The building is pretty much the same. You can see this is the board they have. This building was built in 1830, and Sunday service and blah, blah, blah. It's very beautiful. The inside view. Okay, oh yes. In I think 2013, we celebrated Swamiji's 150th birthday, and they welcomed us all. We had a big celebration inside the church, and this plaque now is installed in the church there. And they, to our great surprise, and some of you I think took part in that celebration, the people in Annisquam were so welcoming. So they said, we are so proud of this fact that this great yogi came and spoke at our church. And so the village, the families living in that village, they said they want to present a play on some of the incidents from Swamiji's life. And so all the local people got together and they presented a great play. I have a few photographs from that, but again, some other time. So this was what was put. Swamiji came there in 1893, but also in 1894. Later on, he came again and spoke at the church. So this is how the church looks inside. I said pretty much, they say that nothing has changed, I was told. They had this Swamiji being put there, how he may have looked. And so it was from here then, Swamiji went to Chicago, and then rest, as they say, is history. So this is a very broad outline. Also, Swamiji has visited more places, more towns and in Massachusetts than in any other state in the country. He visited the place several times afterwards. But again, as I said, that would be for some other day. So today we are here to celebrate the arrival of Swamiji to Boston area in 1893 and to look in our own hearts and see how our own lives have been blessed, how much we have learned, and how our lives are transformed and are in the process of being transformed as a result of knowing about his life, about his teachings, and about the great truths. None of the teachings he claimed to be something that he originated. He was only one among the many, many enlightened ones who have come in every point in history to help the rest of us, to bring these ancient truths which have manifested in the hearts of people in different forms and in different ways. And so he belongs to that long line of teachers of the past and a long line of teachers in the future who are going to come in future as well. So I conclude with my prayers that may through Swami Vivekananda's grace, may our own spiritual journey be happy, be productive, and that maybe all our hearts may be filled with strength, with peace, contentment, and fulfillment through His grace. Om Jananim Saratam Devim Ramakrishnam Jagadgurum Padapadme Tayo Shritva Pranamami Muhurmuhu.
Good morning. One of the aspects I find most remarkable about Swami Vivekananda is his ability to translate the timeless, vast, supreme truth of Vedanta into practical teachings that are appealing to all of us and that we can incorporate into our daily lives. His teachings always stress practice and actual experience over theoretical understanding, or what he called intellectual gymnastics. As he says, we shall see now how this Vedanta can be carried into our everyday life, the city life, the country life, the national life, and the home life of every nation. For if a religion cannot help man wherever he may be, wherever he stands, it is not much use. It will remain only a theory for the chosen few. Religion, to help mankind, must be ready and able to help him in whatever condition he is, in servitude or in freedom, in the depths of degradation or on the heights of purity. Everywhere equally, it should be able to come to his aid. To practice and experience, the practice and experience of oneness and unity in our everyday life is central to the teachings of Swami Vivekananda. As he says, there is but one life, one world, one existence. Everything is that one. The difference is in degree and not in kind. So how do we experience this unity in action, such that spiritual life and everyday life are in fact one and the same? As Swamiji says, the actual should be reconciled to the ideal. The present life should be made to coincide with life eternal. To do this, Swami Vivekananda directs us to immerse ourselves in constant remembrance of the divine through hearing, understanding, and meditating upon it, until it manifests itself within us. In his own words, hear day and night that you are that soul. Repeat it to yourselves day and night till it enters into your very veins, till it tingles in every drop of blood, till it is in your flesh and bone. Let the whole body be full of that one ideal. I am the birthless, the deathless, the blissful, the omniscient, the omnipotent, ever-glorious soul. Think on it day and night. Think on it till it becomes part and parcel of your life. Meditate upon it, and out of that will come work. Out of the fullness of the heart the mouth speaketh, and out of the fullness of the heart the hand worketh also. Action will come. Fill yourselves with the ideal, whatever you do. Think well on it. All your actions will be magnified, transformed, deified by the very power of the thought. But we often ask ourselves, how can we practice this when we're engulfed in our daily responsibilities and activities at home, school, and work? How do we hear this truth day and night? We're currently extremely fortunate to have almost unlimited access to spiritual talks and readings, more than ever before by virtue of mobile technology, so that it's possible to listen to spiritual teachings through podcasts and other online media throughout the day, whether on our commutes to and from work, on our way to the grocery store, or in the evening or weekend leisure time. We can further access great works such as those of Swami Vivekananda with just a single swipe on our smartphones. How much more uplifted would we all be if we did this instead of checking Twitter or WhatsApp the next time we take our phone out of our pockets. The teachings are highly accessible to all of us, and it's up to us to hoist our sails and make use of them. How do we repeat that we are the divine to ourselves day and night? Again, it's a question of motivation and perseverance. Can we motivate ourselves to carry out constant mental repetition of the name of God wherever we are, at home making dinner, in the bus or the car, sitting in a conference room at work, or ferrying the kids to music practice after school? For assistance, we can surround ourselves with images of the divine, such as pictures of the spiritual ideal, in the rooms of our home, on our desk at work, and in our backpack or wallet, so that even when we take our credit card out at the checkout counter at Trader Joe's, we're reminded of the ideal. The methods are simple, but it's motivation and perseverance that are key. How do we meditate upon this truth so that it will guide us and drive our actions? In addition to our daily practice of morning and evening meditation, is it possible for us to practice meditation in action, such that when we interact with another person, we see, or at least imagine, the divine within them, whether it is our family sitting with us at the dinner table, our fellow passengers on the bus, or our bosses and co-workers in the conference room? While this may be fairly easy with people whom we like, it's truly more challenging, and perhaps all the more important, with the infuriating co-worker or the rude driver on Mass Pike, whom we've all encountered. However, can we strive to see even these challenging persons as the Lord himself, trying to tell us something, and to hear the message that he's sending us? As Swami Vivekananda says, "The moment I have realized God sitting in the temple of every human body, the moment I stand in reverence before every human being and see God in him, the moment I am free of bondage, everything that binds vanishes and I am free." This is the most practical of all worship and always will be. In one word, the ideal of Vedanta is to know man as he really is, and this is its message, that if you cannot worship your brother man, the manifested God, how can you worship a God who is unmanifested? Do you not remember what the Bible says? If you cannot love your brother whom you have seen, how can you love God whom you have not seen? If you cannot see God in the human face, how can you see him in the clouds, or in images made of dull, dead matter, or in mere fictitious stories of our brain? I shall call you religious from the day you begin to see God in men and women, and then you will understand what is meant by turning the left cheek to the man who strikes you on the right. When you see man as God, everything, even the tiger, will be welcome. Whatever comes to you is but the Lord, the Eternal, the Blessed One, appearing to us in various forms, as our father and mother and friend and child. They are our own soul playing with us. As our human relationships can thus be made divine, so our relationship with God. To practice and experience unity in action, perseverance and strength are essential. As Swami Vivekananda says, "Strength is life, weakness is death. Strength is felicity, life eternal, immortal. Weakness is constant strain and misery. Weakness is death." God is not to be reached by the weak. Never be weak. You have infinite strength within you. How else will you conquer anything? How else will you come to God?
Good morning. I came to this community just a little bit over 4 years ago after being a practicing Catholic for 52 years. So 4 years ago, I didn't know who Swami Vivekananda was. I didn't know Holy Mother. I didn't know Sri Ramakrishna. And now I'm going to just share with you 12 descriptions of Swami Vivekananda, and then I'm going to give 5 samples of what he said that has inspired me. Swami Vivekananda is many things to me. He's an inspiring and humble teacher. He sets a good example for others. He brings people and disparate religions together. He has a pure and positive mind. He renounced the world and asks us to do the same. He gives us exceptionally clear messages to live our lives by. There's no confusion whatsoever what he's saying. He encourages us to go beyond and seek higher goals. He asks us to concentrate, focus, and meditate. He simplifies eternal truths. He makes it safe for us to reject cultural norms. He asks us to inwardly reflect, and he creates a tremendous sense of urgency within us. So here's his words in about 5 or 6 of these that have most struck me. The first is on setting a good example. Have a kind word for all. It spoils work to show temper. Let people say whatever they like. Stick to your own convictions, and rest assured, the world will be at your feet. Bringing religions together and unifying in a world that is trying to isolate and separate us. So these words come to us very fresh as great, stimulating, life-giving words, much fresher than they were when they were written. The words, that which exists is one. Sages call it by various names. We have to learn that all religions, under whatever name they may be called, Hindu, Buddhist, Muslim, or Christian, have the same God, and he or she who derides any one of these derides his own God. About creating a positive and pure mind, and he's very dramatic when he does this too. I wish we could see him on film, because I can hear him as I read him. He says, Shivoham, Shivoham, I am Shiva, I am Shiva. I feel as if a thunderbolt strikes me on the head when I hear people dwell on negative thoughts. That sort of self-depreciating attitude is another name for disease. Do you call that humility? It is vanity in disguise. On renunciation and going back to Mother. Renounce and give up. What did Christ say? Christ said, he that loseth his life for my sake shall find it. Again and again did he preach renunciation as the only way to perfection. There comes a time when the mind awakes from this long and dreary dream. The child gives up its play and wants to go back to its mother. Every one of these is inspiring. I just put this one under the category of inspiring. Ramakrishna Paramahamsa came for the good of the world. Call him a man or God or an incarnation, just as you please. Accept him each in your own light. He who will bow before him will be converted into purest gold this very moment. Humility and inspiration. My master used to say, this world is a huge lunatic asylum where everyone is mad. Some after money, some after sex, some after name and fame, and a few after God. I prefer to be mad after God. God is the philosopher's stone that turns us to gold in an instant. The form remains, but the nature has changed. The human form remains, but no more can we hurt or sin. On clear messages. After every happiness comes misery. They may be far apart or near. The more advanced the soul, the more quickly does one follow the other. What we want is neither happiness nor misery. Both make us forget our true nature. Both are chains. One is iron, one is gold. Behind both is the Atman, who knows neither happiness nor misery. These are states, and states must ever change. But the nature of the Atman is bliss, peace, and unchanging. We have not to get it, we have it. Only wash away the dross and see it. On going beyond and seeking higher goals and not being complacent. Do not go for glass beads, leaving the mine of diamonds. This life is a great chance. What? You seek the pleasure of the world? God is the fountain of all bliss. Seek for the highest, aim for the highest, and you shall reach the highest. On simple and eternal truths. Seek ye first the kingdom of God, and everything shall be added unto you. This is the one great duty. This is renunciation. Live for an ideal and leave no place in the mind for anything else. Let us put forth all our energies to acquire that which never fails, our spiritual perfection. If we have true yearning for realization, we must struggle, and through struggle, growth will come. We shall make mistakes, but they may be angels unaware. Under the topic of countercultural, 100 waves of prosperity have come and gone over my country, India. We've learned the lesson which no child can yet understand. The lesson is vanity. This hideous world is Maya. Renounce and be happy. Give up the idea of sex and possessions. There is no other bond. He causes us to go inward and reflect on how am I, how are we living, how are we treating others. He says it is a well-known psychological fact that those who are ever ready to abuse others cannot bear the slightest touch of criticism from others. As an eloquent teacher, truth is of two kinds: that which is known through the 5 ordinary senses and by reasoning based thereupon. That which is known through the subtle, supersensuous power of yoga. Knowledge acquired by the first means is called science, and knowledge acquired by the second is called the Vedas. And finally, he creates a tremendous sense of urgency within us. For those who procrastinate regarding renunciation, saying, "Oh, not so soon, I shall do it when the time comes," self-realization is very far off. Let me realize the truth this moment in this very life. These are the words of a hero. May each of us realize the truth in this very life. Thank you.
Good morning. What I most admire about Vivekananda, and am struck by, is the force of his being, his drive, insight, and directness on the human level, and the compelling strength of his vision on the spiritual level. When the message of Vivekananda was channeled by this kind of force, when the message of Vedanta was channeled by this kind of force, the world moved. As Vivekananda said, "Never lose faith in yourself. You can do anything in this universe. Never weaken. All power is yours." On a human level, for me, Vivekananda is the model of a karma yogi, working tirelessly in India, America, and Europe. In India, he experienced firsthand as a wandering monk the poverty and need of rural Indians, and he founded the Ramakrishna Mission, based on the idea of selfless work to minister to both material and spiritual needs. He had a vision of India rising up to address systemic issues of economic and social equality, and he worked to make that vision a reality. I also admire Vivekananda's sense of humor, which was usually at his own expense. He understood very well the preconceptions that Westerners would have, and would remark about how they must see him with his different dress and manner. He understood all this, but didn't let it affect his work in the least. And how he worked and worked, a tireless karma yogi reaching out to his fellow men and women, as he crisscrossed America and sailed back and forth across the ocean to Europe and India. He jokingly said to one woman disciple in San Francisco, "You know, I may have to be born again. You see, I have fallen in love with man." On a spiritual level, he not only touched, but impacted countless lives all over the world. In America and Europe, he taught, toured, and lectured endlessly. He inspired and guided many devotees, including Sister Nivedita, who under his direction started and ran a school for girls in India. I admire Vivekananda as an intelligent, insightful, and striving man of God who is able to work very much in the world and still not be of the world. Vivekananda came by his conviction the hard way, testing, trying, and confirming the ideas of Vedanta for himself. I admire the strength of character this took, and that once Vivekananda gave himself to Ramakrishna and to Kali, it was without question and with all his being. I see Vivekananda as a modern-day prophet whose mission was to wake up people to the possibilities of spiritual existence. Vivekananda is aligned in my mind with Christianity's John the Baptist, a fierce figure striding through the wilderness, calling with a ringing voice that you must be born again, that you have to see and experience another level of life, that of real existence. That's very like Vivekananda's call, awake, arise, and stop not till the goal is reached, a message that urges people to wake up and realize what they really are. The Vivekananda's command to stop not till the goal is reached goes further. It speaks to me of his strength, his determination, and his nearly unstoppable force. He was and is a unique personality. He was able to see the world on two levels, the human and the divine, Maya and Brahman, and make it possible for other people to see it as well. When he stood up at the Parliament of Religions at Chicago in 1893 and said his first words, that simple sisters and brothers of America, and 7,000 people, 7,000, rose to their feet. What did that mean? What happened? I think that Vivekananda's force and certainty and conviction ran through his words in a way that people who had no idea who he was or what he represented couldn't help but feel a fundamental truth was being imparted. Vivekananda cut to the heart of the matter, and the heart of the matter is God, and realizing God, and realizing that we all are part of God, no matter what religion or path you follow. As Vivekananda said, eat the mangoes and let the rest quarrel over the basket. See Christ, then you will be Christian. All else is talk. The less talking, the better. Learn until the glory of the Lord shines through your face. Vivekananda learned and shone, taught and inspired. His life was short, but that matters little. What matters is what he understood and realized, and what he was able to pass on to the rest of the world to help us do the same. Thank you.
Sisters and Brothers of America, welcome. I would like to read a few extracts from Swami Vivekananda's books on education and character. This is from a compilation titled Education. Education for character. The character of any man is but the aggregate of his tendencies, the sum total of the bent of his mind. As pleasure and pain pass before his soul, they leave upon it different impressions. And the result of these combined impressions is what is called a man's character. We are what our thoughts have made us. Each thought is a little hammer blow on the lumps of iron which our bodies are, manufacturing out of it what we want it to be. Words are secondary. Thoughts live. They travel far. And so take care of what you think. Good and evil have an equal share in molding character, and in some cases, misery is a greater teacher than happiness. In studying the great characters of the world, I dare say, in the vast majority of cases, it would be found that it was misery that taught more than happiness. It was poverty that taught more than wealth, and it was blows that brought out their inner fire more than praise. Brought up in the lap of luxury, lying on a bed of roses, and never shedding a tear, who has become great? When there comes affection in the heart, when the storm of sorrow blows all around, and it seems as if light will be seen no more, when hope and courage are almost gone, it is then, in the midst of this great spiritual tempest, that the light within gleams. Using the simile of a lake for the mind, every ripple, every wave that rises in the mind, when it subsides, does not die out entirely, but leaves a mark and future possibility of that mark coming out again. Every work that we do, every movement of the body, every thought that we think, leaves such an impression on the mind stuff, and even when such impressions are not obvious on the surface, they are sufficiently strong to work beneath, subconsciously. What we are every moment is determined by the sum total of these impressions on the mind. Each man's character is determined by the sum total of these impressions. If good impressions prevail, the character becomes good. If bad, it becomes bad. If a man continuously hears bad words, thinks bad thoughts, does bad actions, his mind will be full of bad impressions, and they will influence his thought and work without his being conscious of the fact. In fact, these bad impressions in him will create a strong motive power for doing bad actions. He will be like a machine in the hands of his impressions. Similarly, if a man thinks good thoughts and does good work, the sum total of these impressions will be good, and they, in a similar manner, will force him to do good in spite of himself. When a man has done so much good work and good thought, so there is an irresistible tendency in him to do good. Even if he wishes to do evil, his mind, as the sum total of his tendencies, will not allow him to do so. He is completely under the influence of the good tendencies. When such is the case, a man's good character is said to be established. If you really want to judge the character of a man, look not at his great performances. Watch a man do his most common actions. Those are indeed the great things which will tell you the real character of the great man. Great occasions rouse even the lowest of human beings to some kind of greatness. But he alone is great, whose character is great always, the same wherever he be. When a large number of these impressions is left on the mind, they coalesce and become a habit. It is said, habit is second nature. It is first nature also, and the whole nature of man. Everything that we are is the result of habit. That gives us consolation, because if it is only habit, we can make it and unmake it at any time. The only remedy for bad habits is counter habits. All the bad habits can be controlled by good habits. Go on doing good, thinking holy thoughts continuously. That is the only way to suppress base impressions. Never say any man is hopeless, because he only represents a character, a bundle of habits, which can be checked by new and better ones. Character is repeated habits, and repeated habits alone can reform character. The cause of all apparent evil is in ourselves. Do not blame any supernatural being. Neither be hopeless nor despondent, nor think that we are in a place from which we can never escape unless someone comes and gives us a helping hand. We are like silkworms. We make the thread of our own substance and spin the cocoon, and in course of time, we are imprisoned inside. The network of karma that we have woven around ourselves, and in our ignorance, we feel as if we are bound, weep and wail for help. But help does not come from without. It comes from within ourselves. Cry to all the gods of the universe. I cried for years, and in the end, I found that I was helped. But help came from within, and I had to undo what I had done by mistake. I had to cut the net which I had thrown round myself. I have committed many mistakes in my life, but mark you, without those mistakes, I should not be what I am today. I do not mean that you are to go home and willfully commit mistakes. Do not mistake me in that way, but do not mope because of the mistakes you have committed. We commit mistakes because we are weak, and we are weak because we are ignorant. Who makes us ignorant? We ourselves. We put our hands over our eyes and weep that it is dark. Take the hands away, and there is light. The light exists for us always, the self-effulgent nature of the human soul. Do you not hear what modern scientific men say? What is the cause for evolution? Desire. The animal wants to do something because it does not find the environment favorable, and therefore develops a new body. Who develops it? The animal itself, its will. Continue to exercise your will, and it will take you higher. The will is almighty. If it is almighty, you may say, why cannot I do everything? But you are only thinking of your little self. Look back on yourself from the state of the amoeba to the human being. Who made all that? Your own will. Can you deny that it is almighty? That which has made you come up so high can make you go higher still. What you want is character, strengthening of the will. If you go home and sit in sackcloth and ashes, and weep your lives out because you took certain false steps, it will not help you, but will weaken you all the more. In this room, if it is full of darkness for thousands of years, and you come in and begin to weep and wail, will the darkness vanish? Strike a match, and light comes in a moment. What good will it do to you to think all your lives, oh, I have done evil, I have made many mistakes? It requires no ghost to tell us that. Bring in the light, and evil goes in a moment. Build up your character, and manifest your ever-real nature, the effulgent, the resplendent, the ever-pure, and call it up in everyone you see. Thank you.
Thank you for the music and all the reflections as we come towards the conclusion of today's celebration. Swami Vivekananda once referred to New York as the purse of America and Boston as the brain of America. I said that Swami Vivekananda visited more towns in Massachusetts than in any other state in the country. And so he not only visited Boston 125 years ago, but because he visited other towns as well, we might have similar celebrations in other places as well. One celebration that we will have in the beginning of September will be Swamiji's visit to Salem, Massachusetts, 125 years ago. I'll let you know the details when the program is finalized. So I would encourage everyone amongst us, even if we have read Swami Vivekananda's life and his words, to use this time of this year to look back at whatever book of Swamiji you might have at home and go through them again. Because sometimes a lot of the words of great ones like him, it's not enough to read them once. Every time we read them, because we are growing up, we are evolving, those deeper and deeper layers of meaning from those words will come to us. Even history, I found that a lot of the things that I mentioned in the beginning, the historical things about which places Swamiji visited, I had read many of these when I was back in India, when I was growing up. And that time, many of these places were just names, because other than the photographs and the names, I didn't know. But then when I came here, and then I actually visited many of the places that Swamiji had been, and then when you go back to the book and you read it, it suddenly becomes alive when you have had a direct acquaintance with that place. And that's the beauty of it. So sometimes when I go for a walk here, because Swamiji did live and move in different parts of Boston at various points. So it's quite likely that the road on which you are walking may have been the road he may have walked before. And it's good to think about it that way, because enlightened beings of his stature, they don't just come and go. They may visit a place, they may live there for a day or two, but something of that stays in that place. And when we remember that and consciously dwell on it, we get the benefit of that. Sister Nivedita, Margaret Noble, Vivekananda's Irish disciple, she once wrote that and these are her words, she said, when many of us who have known Vivekananda for decades, long after we have passed away, it might seem as if Vivekananda's name is forgotten. But then a few, 50, 60, 70 years, let them pass. And then you begin to see the effects of his words. And that's true largely. If you just go out into the street, not everyone will even know Vivekananda, even Vedanta for that matter. But what prophets of his caliber do is that they inject the seeds into the collective unconscious of a race or a civilization. And then it takes time for those seeds to germinate. And then, while one thing that we do see, if we look back at the general tenor of the ideas in a society, say 70, 80, 100 years ago, and if you begin to see how some of the ideas which seemed outlandish or seemed not pretty unusual are kind of entering into mainstream. Some surveys done showed how many people were open to the idea of a rebirth, say 100 years ago, and then 20 or 30 years ago. And we find a large number of people today begin to accept the possibility that there may be such a thing as a rebirth. Increasing number of people today accept the possibility that there may be truth in every religion. It's not just that one religion is true and everything else is wrong. So some of these changes and these changes collectively take time. They don't occur overnight. But that these changes have occurred, this is a documented evidence for that. A lot of the surveys and polls taken show that. Now, where do we trace the cause of that change is left to every person. But many of Vivekananda's students and devotees feel that these ideas that he injected into us are now beginning to grow. And so many of the students of Vivekananda credit him, although he probably could care less whether we trace it back to him or not. As he famously said, I'm a voice without a form. So it's not that he demanded to be recognized as having somehow brought about these changes. But again, it's left to us today as we reflect on the things that have inspired us and see how they have changed us as individuals and how they are changing the community, the society in which we are a part. So let's continue with this study, this reflection as we go forward. About the upcoming program this week, we'll have the Tuesday and Saturday meditation as usual. We concluded the Narada Bhakti Sutra on Wednesdays. So beginning this Wednesday, we will begin the study of a small Upanishad called the Kaivalya Upanishad. So that will be the text we will study on Wednesday. And next Sunday, our subject will be Meditation 101. This was a request I received some time back, in fact more than one, that to have a reflection on meditation, the introduction to meditation. So that's something most of us do have a meditation practice of our own. And so it will be good to reflect a little bit on the centrality of this practice in our life. That we will do next Sunday. So we'll do a prayer now and then we will have Sarvamangala. Prayer on page 3 of your book. May the Divine Being, who is the Father in heaven of the Christians, Holy One of the Jewish faith, Allah of the Muslims, Buddha of the Buddhists, Tao of the Taoists, Ahura Mazda of the Zoroastrians, the Great Spirit of the Native Americans, and Brahman of the Hindus, lead us from the unreal to the real, from darkness to light, from death to immortality. May we be granted strength, freedom, and clear understanding. May we learn to see God in our own hearts and in everyone around us. May God bless us all and fill our hearts with gratitude, grace, and love. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Peace, peace, peace be unto you.
sing Sarvamangala on page 5.
Jai